Hello, I'm Lonnie Douglas with the Eugene Springfield Solidarity Network.
My name's Sarah Pishnary. I'm a board member with Solidarity Action Network, sister 501c4 of ESSN.
Outstanding. We're here today with Zondi Zinke, who is candidate for mayor of Eugene. Before we get started, just a couple of small things. These interviews that we are doing are not endorsements of any one particular candidate. We are doing these because of the COVID outbreak and the fact that our candidates are not able to engage with voters, not able to knock on doors. So this is an attempt for our organizations to get the candidates out there in front of some of the voters, allow you to hear what they have to say, and hopefully it will help you make a more informed decision when you're filling out your ballots. So Zondi, why don't we go ahead and start off by giving you a little time to introduce yourself and tell us why you're running for mayor.
Great. Thanks, Lonnie and Sarah and ESSN and SAN. Is that what you call it? It's awesome that you guys are doing this. I really appreciate it, in part because something that I want to comment on is how inadequate our democratic system is on the local level. And even anything I will touch upon will not really get at the full inadequacies because, frankly, full inadequacies get into things like racism and our whole economic structure and all these things. But so I'm going to say, even dealing with it on a fairly surface level, what I can say about my campaign is that I'm a solidarity candidate, and you'll see in the voters pamphlet that there are 5 of us running on a shared platform, the solidarity platform of climate urgency and human rights and regenerative economics and empowered democracy and decolonization. And hopefully, as I talk and answer some of my other questions, I'll be able to express a bit more something about each of those pillars. I know it can be a bit confusing to voters. Why would candidates run together even for the same seat? In fact, I was just on Reddit last night and I saw people saying, solidarity platform. I've never seen this before where people are running on the same platform. Are they Christian? Are they Jesus-y? And then other people were like, no, I think they're tight. No, I think they're for real. I think that, look at their platform and then posting the platform. And that was exciting to see people trying to, understand what this is about. And I do know it's confusing. And I'm sorry that a combination of COVID and also, frankly, the inadequacies of our democratic process make it very hard to get the word out to explain what this is about. And so we know, all the people running on the Solidarity platform know what great barriers there are for anyone who is not interested in establishment politics to break through. We are just not, you cannot have decolonization in your platform, something that's important to us, and be endorsed even by organizations that you would expect to endorse you, because viability is always an issue. We hope that we can in the future, moving forward, get the attention of we've had the attention, but actually be viable enough with enough organizing that that we would be considered viable even with our positions. So, for example, when I talk about the barriers, the Chamber of Commerce offers a forum to candidates. Both Candace King and I participated fully in the vetting process, and neither of us were offered a platform through their forum. You can't have economic stances that challenge the economic status quo, which we know supports income and wealth inequality, and be allowed in, right? So we're trying to find another way to collectively use what's inherently a resource of everyone, and that's the power of the people coming together and organizing. So that's, really, we have some different ideas, different personalities. There's distinctions between us, And we've even argued amongst ourselves about this, that. But fundamentally, we are clear that there's a big difference between us and the current incumbents. On the mayoral level, I will say that there are 6 people running, and sorry, there are 7 people running. There are 6 non-incumbents running, and we support you voting for any one of us, whether we're, Solidarity platform candidate or not. So something you can keep in mind, there's a man named Robert Patterson, who's a candidate for mayor, and because of obstacles, he is not in the voters pamphlet. And so everyone should be aware of his campaign. And I think that one thing I would like people to understand, that if you obviously, the process wasn't, the process by which people can hear from non-incumbents, grassroots campaigners is not great in the first place. And then amidst COVID, it's just weakened all the more. And so if you want this election to have a real choice, I encourage people to choose among the non-incumbent mayoral candidates. And so the way it works is, and this isn't even clear to many people, that if any candidate for a seat gets 50% of the vote in the primary, they will move forward. And if they don't, then the top 2 will move forward. So it's a guarantee that Lucy Vinnies will have a majority of votes. So I encourage voters to consider, hey, what if we didn't vote for her and we voted for someone else? Only a small fraction of you would even listen to this strategy. But then we might be able to have a choice and actually have some possibility of real debates. And we've had no live debates. I haven't debated with her at all. And so I encourage you to consider that strategy. Yeah, I think that I will just start with that, and I'll just say all our names. There's Thomas Hura, Matthew Uke, and Robert Patterson are all running for mayor, and also as officially Solidarity Platform candidates, Stacey Westover, Benjamin Ricker, and myself.
Okay.
Zondi Zinke.
All right.
Zondi,
Okay.
we're going to move on to the questions. I'll start with the first one. It's clear that the current recession will exacerbate Eugene's affordable housing crisis and force yet more residents onto the streets. How will you respond to the immediate spike in homelessness and housing instability, and what measures will you take over the long term to help Eugene's unhoused community?
Well, first of all, what needs to be done already needed to be done. So it just needs to be done, tenfold or whatever the numbers end up being. But we know that we already had the highest number of unsheltered homeless people per capita in the nation here. And so here's what I'll say. Both the mayor and current council and the county, they all tout what's called the TAC report. It's a technical assistance collaborative that's useless to people. But anyway, it's their plan that they invested almost a year and a half in just hiring consultants out of Boston to come up with 10 recommendations and for how to address homelessness. It is absolutely clear that the plan, what's called the TAC report, so this is the big plan that was put together by the county and the city, I shouldn't say put together by them. They hired consultants and now they're trying to adopt the plan. It is totally inadequate. So it involves a 75-bed shelter. It involves 350 units of permanently supported housing. It involves some diversion money. So if you say, hey, you can say, like, is there somewhere else you could go? We might give you some funds so you go see your Uncle Bob in Kansas. So it's completely inadequate. And and I think a way that can be obvious to the public is to just consider a 75-bed shelter when we have, by official counts, close to 2,000 people unhoused, and those are completely underreported numbers. And beyond that, in the time that in just the time that the consultants took to put the report together, the number of unhoused people, that was like a 9-10 month period, the number of unhoused people increased by 30%. So it's you know, I think we can understand when there are well over 1,000 people who have no shelter options whatsoever every single night, a 75-bed shelter is not going to cut it. And so I would like if our officials spoke the truth. It's fine to support that plan, but what else? And what about, and probably the grossest thing about it is that plan is it's a 3 to 5 year plan. And so what about people who are suffering right now, right? I'm interested in bettering the lives of people now, lives that are deteriorating every day, right? So what can be done? First of all, I would say that the city must do there's so much that the city can do immediately, right? We can provide, and some of it we're doing more so since because of the pandemic. And I don't know if that is because there's FEMA money that will cover most of the expenditures, or I don't know if that's to protect the housed population. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that there's ill will, but when there has been a bleeding wound for so long and it hasn't received much dressing at all, right? You have to wonder, okay, why now? What's the difference now? In any case, the pandemic shows that, it is possible to get tents to individuals, right? To allow people, I mean, unfortunately, the city, I was going to say to allow people to camp places, but in fact, the city is still sleeping people. So even though that's against all public health guidelines. We need to have sanctioned places for people to sleep immediately. So right now I'm just trying to focus on things that can be done immediately. Sanctioned places for people to sleep, but the risk in sanctioning places for people to sleep is that, then you further criminalize anyone who's not comfortable going to that place. And so we shouldn't allow that to happen. Sanctioned places to sleep, funding for what would make a big difference now in many people's lives. We need a diversity of options, so Conestoga huts wouldn't work for some people, but they would work for many in the short term, and it would be an improvement for many. Tiny houses would be an improvement. Supporting self-directed camps would be an improvement. So the city can support them with, hygiene facilities and not criminalizing, et cetera. Beyond that, we need to restructure our budget and actually prioritize baseline resilience for the whole community. So we'll get to the payroll tax later, but right, I mean, how the funds are allocated in the payroll tax is just one example of how, you know what, you can get money for things if you want it, right? And so in terms of, things like housing instability, I think that we have seen our grassroots organizations do a great job of assessing need. And so we should support more of that. I'm being flagged on my time, so I'll move on.
No problem. Anne's way better at doing that than I am, actually. So the next question, unless you have a follow-up, Sarah, for that one, okay. So the next question, last June, the City Council voted to implement a payroll tax in Eugene for city safety services. And they also voted, the city councilors voted to not refer that tax to the voters. Um, uh, this is a two-part question. One, what's your stance on payroll taxes in general? And do you agree or disagree, and elaborate a little bit on the city council's decision not to refer that one to the voters or allow the voters, us to vote on it?
So a payroll tax is a regressive tax because it's affecting when you affect people's income, where some people have disposable income and other people are living paycheck to paycheck, scraping by, right? Then you're cutting into necessary funds for some people and just disposable funds for others. So I don't support a payroll tax generally, but I support wealth tax, that category of taxation. In terms of not referring it to the voters, I think that if the media didn't really cover the whole story, in part because it was an 18-month process, the evolution of the payroll tax, where it started with the city asking people, like doing a survey, saying, what are your front of mind concerns? And the largest category of response, single category of response, was 40% of the people responded that homelessness was their primary concern. The next largest single category of response was 7%, and that concern was traffic congestion. And then at just 4% of the people said public safety. If you look at how the payroll tax funds are allocated, you will see that 80% of the funding goes towards what I call criminalization, what many people call public safety, but it is the vast majority of that 80% is for more cops, prosecutors, and jail beds. Okay, 10% of the funding goes to the fire department. Only 7% goes to homelessness services. With some semantic maneuvering, they expand that to 10%, but anyway, it's 7%. So what we see there is an exact inversion of the people's will in how the money is allocated, right? So of course they didn't want to put it to the voters. It was their agenda to do what they wanted. And since they were inverting the will of the people, they would have known that it's not going to be passed, right? They still did a big PR campaign, and it was such a gross manufacturing of consent that never came through, in fact, was never tested since they didn't put it to the ballot. But, I remember all during their big PR push, seeing cops building Conestoga huts. I hadn't seen that before, but big pictures in the paper. First of all, other people building the Conestoga huts for a large part are volunteering, but these cops were suddenly getting paid, right? So we're paying for their PR campaign to convince us of something they won't actually ask us. And so it was really disgusting to me. And I'll just say they hired a strategist, Dr. Gary Mann Ross, who said, you have got to put this to the voters. I mean, their own consultants that we all paid for said, you have got to put this to the voters. A payroll tax is unprecedented, and to do it then without putting it to the voters, you just can't do it, is what he said. But they just did it, right? It reminds me a little bit of when Kesey Square was at stake of being privatized, and so many people were against it. And I went to a meeting that they were having a forum on issues about downtown. The city put this on. I went, and it was tables in a room, 8 people at a table, and they must have had at least 32 tables. And what did they do? They instructed everybody and said, you can talk about any issue you want. We want you to identify issues you care about. You cannot talk about Kesey Square. Of the 32 plus tables, every single table but one decided to override the instructions they'd been given and speak to what they cared about. We were not allowed to do that with the payroll tax.
Okay. Sarah, go ahead.
Quick follow-up on that, Zondi. You just talked quite a bit about city government going against the will of the people, or maybe in their or not bringing in the will of the people to their policy decision-making processes. Is this important to you, and how do you suggest, or how do you view your role in facilitating the voice of the people being heard in decision-making processes?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And I think it gets into some of my vision and how I consider, for example, how the city is addressing climate catastrophe. We are sorry, trying to answer your question without opening up. Well, I'll be shorter at the end because this is part of my vision. And I was thinking of it in terms of what we need to do around climate change and organizing around climate change. We will not meet our climate goals if we do not allow people to organize, right, around so that everybody understands, and in a way that feels that feels not like, oh, here's the government coming in saying here's mandates, right? That, I mean, we can't even, it needs to be generated from the people. So we need to be organizing amongst each other. How can that happen? So I think that two things. If you I forgot to mention, I think I forgot to mention my opening, that it's pathetic that we do not have publicly funded elections, and that we do not have public platforms, you know, for candidates to get their word out, right? So some people can afford whopping amounts, right, to get all this like plastic put up on everyone's lawns, etc. So the same sort of thinking can go towards wanting an empowered democracy. That's one of our platform pieces. So in the past, you would have, you know, I mean, like a free speech in the town square, right? That was an original vision, right, for an empowered democracy. It is completely inadequate because we don't live in towns anymore. This is a big city. So how do we give resources, which the city can do, provide resources for organizing citizens, right? So, you know, any organization could come and say, hey, we are applying for resource in order to, and so that the public money can be used to help people organize. I think that is absolutely fundamental. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if that answered your question.
So we'll move on to the next one. We flipped the last two questions around. The vision one obviously is at the end now. So the next one, the need to incentivize affordable housing development can place landowners and developers, those are one group, affordable housing or low income housing activists and labor groups at odds. How would you manage the conflict between these groups, the 1%, the wealthy, and the rest of the community, the workers, labor unions, the activists? How would you manage the conflicts between those?
Well, something I would do is direct city staff to identify the most progressive funding mechanisms by which to significantly fund publicly owned affordable housing, and likely even mixed income social housing. So that's a big thing to do. And it's not the only thing to do, but it's a big thing to do. And if the what that does is, first of all, then labor is within the control of the electeds, right? And if we, I mean, to make meaningful change, all of it's got to happen. If we have a crap democratic process, then our electeds don't mean much, and we don't have accountability, et cetera. But if we were to have publicly publicly owned affordable housing, that would mean we have broken through the political system. And so just some comments on that. It's a myth that public housing is necessarily undesirable. Okay, I read well over 60% of the population in Vienna lives in publicly owned housing, and there's just no reason that it's impossible. If you look at AOC's platform, if you look at Bernie's platform, Green New Deal platform, it calls for publicly owned housing, municipally owned housing even. So one, I want to debunk that. What that also means is that we cannot be cornered by this idea of free market supply. Them saying, oh, then if you don't give us this tax break, we won't build. So if we look at the Gordon lofts, which was, this is so absurd. So we gave in excess of 4 million. 4 million was a low estimate of the 10-year tax break to Brian Obey and Casey Barrett, right? That family, the former mayor's family, has 5 generations alive in Eugene. And yet the council was still convinced that if we don't give them this tax break, they won't build. Because that's what they're saying. Oh, we won't be able to build if you don't give us this tax break. Okay, they'll go somewhere else is the idea. They have 5 generations alive here. The one dude has been the mayor here. Do we really, we're so easily cornered, but even so they're getting this big tax break, right? To build, the vast majority of what's going to be in the Gordon lofts was just over 400 square foot studios proposed to rent for just under $1,200 a piece. That was subsidized. That is being subsidized by the city of Eugene. That is insane, and it speaks to this influence that you talk about. There's another example in the riverfront. Okay, in the riverfront, the city has invested $20 million for a park and plaza for the riverfront development. They are planning to invest upwards of 10 million. I can't recall the figure, 10 or $20 million for redoing, prettifying Franklin Boulevard. Okay, so just in those numbers right there, we have maybe $40 million invested in this one little sector, right? Then they are gifting away the steam plant and throwing in $4 million to the same developers who tried to steal Kesey Square. Okay, meanwhile, so all that money, so we see this influence, right? And they try to sell it by saying, oh, well, of the 500 units of housing that will be built in the riverfront, 75 will be affordable. They have not defined affordable. And you know what? When originally this whole urban renewal, I didn't even mention, it's an urban renewal district, which means that unlike the rest of the city where all our money goes into a general pool, that money there just cycles back into itself. Okay, and it's a Trump opportunity zone, so the developers there pay no federal taxes. It's hard to follow all of that, but to try to comprehend how much concentration of wealth of our money, of the public's money, is going into that one spot, and meanwhile, people in West Eugene, in Train Song, Bethel, they suffer 2,000 times the air pollutants. They have 20% of their population reports asthma, and they have in Train Song a 10% lower, a 10-year lower life expectancy than other zip codes in Eugene. This is insane. Okay, so the question of how I would balance that, I would speak truth to it, and absolutely say, we cannot keep supporting this model, this economic model that is called trickle-down economics. We know that it doesn't work.
Okay. Sarah?
All right, thank you, Zondi. Last one. What is your vision for the city? And as an elected representative, what role will you play in bringing that vision to a reality?
Yeah, so I want to say that we would be a model city for how to not just meet, but actually exceed climate goals. Because if we are, and also climate preparedness. I mean, one thing I notice is that the most recent town 350 town hall had all, if I'm remembering, all but one of the speakers were people of color. And when that there, both what was said there and also in the CAP 2.0, when you look at the equity panel recommendations, I mean, this actually breaks my heart. I see that communities of color are focused on preparedness. And I think that's because communities of color know that they cannot count on the government and they might as well just prepare for the catastrophe. And so I don't want, as I speak about trying to meet climate goals, I don't want to actually be promoting something that maybe likely isn't going to be happening, right? I mean, not if we proceed at all as we have been. And I do want to tune into how important preparedness is, particularly, I mean, I was going to say, if we don't look at preparedness, we know who's going to be most affected, and that's the most marginalized people already. But in terms of speaking about meeting climate goals, it can be actually, I think, a tremendously beautiful thing to understand that when one community takes it on, that does and opens up possibilities that does get replicated. And so I would absolutely be 100% invested in an overhaul of our budget to match a local Green New Deal and modeling what needs to be done really to meet and exceed climate goals. The current CAP 2.0 plan is a plan to fail. When the report came out in November, 350 declared it as much immediately. And I have some insight into what is going on with the process now, being in touch with the people who are on the advisory committee. And I can only say that is not going well. There is more of the PRBS going on, and that has to end. Because you know what? When I talk to, for example, Linda Perrine, who's of 350, who's dedicated so much of her life to, she's of course frustrated that more people aren't organizing. But something I had to say to her is, well, you know what? I mean, people are busy, they're overworked, underpaid, all this stuff. And if you look at the documents that come out, there's blueberries on every page. It looks like a wonderfully harmonious world. Our city government is ahead of the curve. There's nothing to be done, which is just more of the local government PR. I have a new little thing here, PRBS. That's And so along with that, I want to say that when I talk about some things can be beautiful, I think it was just, I think I just read in the paper today or yesterday that it's been happening for a while now, but I think it was just in the paper that Carry It Forward is running the shelter in Springfield, right? And so they have actually taken over what was a St. Vinny's contract because it's in the article it says because it's less expensive to the county by $5,000 a week. Okay, so Carry It Forward is a fairly small organization, and you know what? They pay all their employees. I know you know, but they pay all their employees the same. They have people with graduate degrees, people with college degrees, and people whose lives I don't know much about, except that I know that they've been unhoused, right? So that everybody is paid the same, and they have now taken over something that had been contracted to one of the biggest nonprofits in the area, speaks to actually a possibility that the whole nation discounts all the time, which is that actually when you have, I mean, I was looking to promote a cap on wage gaps within, that any direct support from the city for businesses or organizations should be tied to capping the wage gaps between, lowest income and highest income in an organization. Carry it forward, pays all the same. Okay, so and their executive director, right? I happen to know she has graduate degrees. The idea that, oh, she would be willing to be paid the same as somebody who's so easily preyed upon because they're unhoused and in need, right? The idea that capitalism as it is makes an assumption that we are all selfish rather than altruistic. One, it's not true. But even forget about that argument. Just notice that, wow, an organization that has completely structured itself in the impossible way has now taken over a contract that one of the largest nonprofits in our area had, and they are doing it more efficiently for less money for the people and paying everybody the same. That's beautiful and incredible, and that would be part of my vision.
All right. So we were at time. I think we ran a little bit over, but that's fine. You want to thank you very much for coming on and doing this, Zondi. But do you want to give a plug or a website for either you or the Solidarity platform?
Yeah. Yes, please visit our website, which is www.solidarityplatformeugene.org. So www.solidarityplatformeugene.org. I don't know why, if you put in that, a lot of other cool solidarity organizations comes up, but not ours. And then each of the candidates has their own page at the top. So thank you very much.
No problem. Again, I wanted to thank you. Also, just let people know, again, these are not endorsements. These interviews, they're simply a way for voters to get to know you. Also going to make one little stipulation. Solidarity Action Network, Solidarity, Eugene Springfield Solidarity Network are not associated with the Solidarity platform. We all have one really cool word in our name. So just that question has come up a couple of times. So I just wanted to be clear on that. Sarah?
I got nothing. Thanks, Zondi, for being here, and thanks, Lonnie, for your help.
All right. Thank you so much, Zondi. And you good luck with your candidacy.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.